Nearly 500 million girls can't read or write. Extremist organizations like Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda have launched vicious attacks on girls for going to school. Why is educating young girls still a dangerous mission in certain parts of the world, and what can be done about it? Well, to discuss this, we're joined now by the former Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Ms. Gillard is now the board chair of the Global Partnership for Education organization. Ms. Gillard, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
What is the Global Partnership? What does it do?
The Global Partnership for Education is the big funder of education in developing countries. It's a genuine partnership. It brings together donor governments, the United Kingdom, the USA, Australia, countries in Europe, and it brings together 66 developing country partners. We're actively working in 59 of them. It's a partnership model in the sense that donor funds go in, but developing countries have to lift their expenditure on education, and it works to develop a whole education sector plan and better fund it. What's the aim of it? Well, to make sure that every child is getting access to primary school, the Millennium Development Goal, that there aren't girls left out or children with disabilities left out or rural children left out or children who are in persecuted ethnic minorities, that they're all in school. And increasingly we're focusing on the quality too, because we know whilst we're getting more kids in school, around 250 million children don't emerge able to read and write and do basic maths. That's 38% of all kids. So we've got to do better on access and we've got to do better on quality.
Is this money well spent? You know, we know in many cases where funds are raised for things like this, they go to developing countries, it goes down a black hole, we never see it again.
It's certainly well spent. It's very transparent and accountable. We have not faced major problems with corruption or money going where it shouldn't. The Global Partnership for Education is very rigorous about that, and we're able to show good results in some of the toughest parts of the world. I mean, take a country like Yemen. We are able to show that the work of GPE has increased the number of kids in school, and pleasingly, it's increased the number of girls in school. So when you can point to success stories like that, even in fragile and difficult countries, I think that should give the world hope and heart that we can get this done. We can get every child a great education.
Right, so you bring money to the table, you put these partnerships together so that children can be educated. What else do you bring to the table? Expertise, and do you monitor this on a continuous basis?
We certainly do. We bring to the table donor funds, absolutely. We bring expertise, and we bring a very special model of working. When I see my board colleagues at the Global Partnership for Education around that board table, there are donor governments and developing country partners, but there's also civil society organisations, there's representatives of the private sector and private philanthropy. And the way we work at the board level is replicated in country. We bring together a local education group that works on the plan that then gets kids into school and improves learning. That means there's a lot of mutual accountability and a lot of discussion within the country about what's happening in education. So we bring a unique way of working. We are in this next period of time. We've got our replenishment conference in Brussels coming up, and in this next 4-year period when our funds are replenished, we're moving to a results-based financing model. So some money will be at risk depending on developing country partners showing that they're making progress.
So you've got these countries coming together in Brussels and they're going to pledge money?
Yes, they are. Hopefully, we're going to see countries pledge money, and the pledges we're looking for are not just from the global north, from developed countries saying here's our aid money. The pledges we're looking for are also from developing country partners coming along and saying we will increase our domestic education expenditure and putting a number on that.
Right, you say results-based. So do you have to go back to them and say, hey, look, this is what we're doing, this is what we achieved?
Certainly, we've got to be accountable for what we've done so far, and fortunately, we're in a position, country by country, to show change. All up, we can show that the Global Partnership for Education in the last period of replenished funds has supported the education of 23 million children. What we're looking to do over the next 4 years with new funds is to support the education of 29 million children. The world's got 57 million children out of school. Many of them are in very fragile and conflict-affected places, and we're able to work in those places. Some of the countries we work in, other organisations were withdrawing. We stayed and we made a difference for children.
What, in your view, I mean, you've worked in education in Australia as well. You were Minister of Education at one time. What, in your view, is the biggest obstacle facing children in developing countries when it comes to education?
I think that there's a few problems. If it was just one, then it would be easier to solve. Certainly, there's just capacity access issues. Is there a school to go to?
Right.
Second, there's the quality of what's happening in that school, and we've got to be lifting standards and lifting quality and measuring and monitoring that. Then there are some economic pressures on families. For families that are very, very poor, does it make sense to have their children in school or out working in agriculture or perhaps trying to sell things on the streets? We've got to be working with those families to explain the long-term advantage of having their children educated. And then there's a special set of issues for girls, and as well as working at the Global Partnership for Education, I'm working at the Brookings Institution on girls' education, and that's about cultural attitudes, it's about safety, it's about making sure that families understand the importance of educating girl children as well as boys.
When you look at educating people in the developing world, I mean, there are some cultures that don't place a great value on educating children, especially girls. We mentioned Boko Haram, which actually means, Western education is forbidden. There are cases where young girls, Malala Yousafzai, as we mentioned, who was shot for trying to get an education. How do you deal with those differences?
Well, clearly, people who are terrorists and want to stop development and progress identify girls' education as a powerful thing, and girls' education is a powerful thing.
They see it as a threat, right?
They see it as a threat. I see it as a way to change our world. Obviously, girls, from my perspective, should have equal rights to boys, and then we can show the development outcomes of teaching girls. An educated mother is more likely to have a healthy baby and to have that baby survive through the early years of life into adulthood. An educated mother is much more likely to have a child that in turn goes to school and gets education. So if we want poor countries to emerge into the global economy, to be able to take their place in the world, then educating children, including girls, is vital. I am an optimist about this because I know from the work that the Global Partnership for Education has done that it is possible to work in countries where there are cultural predispositions against educating girls and see change. There's a formidable set of safety issues, and we do need to be working on those safety issues. That takes resources, and it's why our replenishment conference is so important.
Right, talking about safety issues, I mean, what about education in war zones? We have Iraq, we have Afghanistan, which have suffered enormous setbacks, not just in infrastructure, but in civil society being destroyed to a large extent.
Clearly we do, and we look at the circumstances, for example, of the Syrian children who are in Lebanon. The Global Partnership for Education has played an advocacy and assisted with coordination to make sure that those Syrian children, to the best extent possible, get some continuing access to education. So I think that there's been a change in the way that the world views education in humanitarian response situations. People used to think of humanitarian response, get the blankets, get the shelter, get the food, get the medical care. All of that still needs to be done, but increasingly people are thinking in the first instance response. There are going to be traumatised children. Many of them used to go to school. That's part of their regular way of working, and a way through trauma and to build a future for those children is to include education as well. In a country like Afghanistan, as Prime Minister, I visited on a number of occasions. Australian soldiers fought there and Australian soldiers died there. But one of the things from going to Afghanistan and through the Global Partnership is clearly happening is more children are in school, more girls are in school. 42% of the children in school are girls, and pleasingly 42% as well of the staff teaching in those schools are women. So we are seeing change even in a country that has been so war affected as Afghanistan.
Does your organisation stipulate what an education curriculum should look like in a developing country? In other words, you bring the money to the table, but you also say this is the way it should be done.
No, we don't prescribe in that sense, because it wouldn't be successful to say, let's, lift the American curriculum or let's lift the Australian curriculum and move it to other countries around the world. But we do work through this partnership model in country to make sure that there is a system that works. Education as we would know it, and that means that there has to be curriculum and there has to be assessment and there has to be a focus on teacher training and professional development. So we don't just want kids sitting in places called schools and not learning. Neither do we want children sitting in places called schools and learning radicalised curriculum.
Right. A question that's often raised, and you hear this from NGOs, and when it comes to raising money in developed countries, going to developing countries, is are there any strings attached to this money?
Oh, and our model has strings attached, and as a result of the results-based financing model we've just adopted, it will have more strings attached. But when we're looking at those strings, I don't think people should get the perspective that this is donor governments coming along and saying, look, it's going to be like this. What we've actually found with our developing country partners is a number of them have embraced the results-based financing model because they want to see change. They want to be held to account for change. They want to measure change. It is their way of working. They have embraced it. So I don't think the whole balance here is about the developed world telling the developing world what to do. It is about partnership and mutual accountability.
Okay, you mentioned the example at the outset of Yemen, where you've enjoyed some success there. What are the other countries where you've seen progress?
Well, we've seen progress in countries in all regions of the world. So whether it's Vietnam or whether it's Yemen or Sierra Leone, Somalia, we've seen change in those countries. We've worked extensively in Africa, in Asia, and we know from all of that that the model works. It works in general to lift more children into education. It works in the specific because we are able to track, even in a country emerging from conflict like Sierra Leone, that we've made an impact.
Ms. Gillard, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.